When they say that book people always have books everywhere, I mean genuinely, book people always have books everywhere. Every nook and cranny in their house, everywhere there's a book somewhere. Hey y'all, welcome to the realm of kid lit comics. I am Ashley. We talk about everything kid lit related, which means books that are typically targeted ages 0 to 18, as well as comics, graphic novels, and manga. And today we're here to talk a little bit about my September wrap up. I'm going to try to make this little rapid fire a little bit more quick than usual because my wrap ups end up being like 50 something minutes long. However, if you hear cats and dogs, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm filming in my room because I'm filming in my room. I'm filming in my room because I'm filming in my room, because that's just the way things ended up. But I'm going to try to rapid fire this a little bit this go round, only because my wrap ups end up taking a very, very long time. And while that's fine and dandy and blah, 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 sometimes it could be a pain to have to go through and edit those things, especially if you've already talked about these books. So there will be, especially because of the manga, because 30 and 30 was in September, and I'm not going to go back and re-review all of the volumes of manga that I read when they are reviewed in 2 videos that are before this one. So that's why I say that. But let's talk a little bit about some stats first, because I didn't do stats last month, but I'm doing stats this month because I had myself good and prepared. Don't judge me, okay? Don't judge me. All right, so in the month of September, I read 50 books. I'm looking down because that's where the spreadsheet is. I don't want y'all to think I'm not like wanting to make eye contact. You know, look at me in my eyes. All right, I'm done. I read 50 books in the month of September for a page count of 9,817. I listened to 49.5 hours worth of audio. And although this spreadsheet says I only have 1 reread, I am actually quite convinced that I had 2. Not I'm convinced, I know for a fact that I had 2 rereads. In terms of my genres for this month, I read primarily contemporary, which was 40%, which is good because that means that the other 60% was spent in other genres like fantasy, historical fiction, horror, sci-fi, mystery, nonfiction, etc. In terms of formatting, of course, the highest number that I have read is going to be manga. That takes up the highest percentage. Then followed by that is novels. Lower on the picture books this month. Read some manhwa this month and read some other graphic novels this month. In terms of author and publication, let's see here. Most of the authors that I read this month were authors that I've read before, which is interesting. I think that I typically do a lot of exploration of new authors, but this month I really did stick to what I knew, which is fine. That's always fine. In terms of my sources, 9 of the books I read were audiobooks, 8 were ebooks, and 33 were physical. Are we surprised or shocked by that? We shouldn't be surprised nor shocked by any of that, because at the end of the day, you get what I'm saying? Like, it should be of no surprise to anybody involved that my ebook and physical numbers are outdoing my audiobook. When it comes to 30 and 30, these numbers are always going to be skewed towards physical and ebook because of the fact that that's the only way to consume that media. So that's not surprising in the least bit. Now, the numbers that I am happy to see is how I acquire these books. So still, my library number is always going to be high. I get a lot of the materials that I read from the library, which is good. We love to support the library. As a librarian, I'm always going to say, support your local library. Semicolon, however, comma, with me and me personally as an Ashley librarian piece, move to the side, like moves to the left, your girl has got to do a better job about reading from her own collection. However, I would like to say that in the month of September, 38% of the books that I read came from my physical collection. 38%. That is the most out of any month in 2025. And I'm very, very proud of myself. I told myself I was going to pick up the pace on reading things that came from my collection, and I did it. And I'm happy that I did it. In terms of audience, we have our highest percentages coming from YA and adults, and even split between the two, 34%. And then the rest is split between children's and middle grade with 16% and 16%. So I don't know. I'm not sure like how I ended up doing that this month. I think also with reading the manga, it kind of makes those adult and young adult numbers skew up a little bit, which ends up being some really, really interesting results. In terms of diversity, 90% of what I read this month was diverse. That's not shocking. That's not shocking because all the stuff that I read in typically 30 and 30 months, it's going to be from Asian authors. So that already is going to skew that number. But 90% is wild. I think that is the highest for any month that I've had in 2025, and I usually just shoot for 50-50. 90% is really, really good. 14 of those titles had LGBT representation in them, which we do love to see. Most of the works that I read this month were split between the USA and Japan, of course. They were kind of neck and neck, and then I had some from South Korea and one from Argentina. I wonder what that was. What did I read from Argentina? I have, that's a shame. I'm like, what did I read that was from Argentina? I have absolutely no idea what I read from Argentina. I only read one nonfiction title this month, and I know exactly what that was, which is lower than what I typically do. I've read a good bit of nonfiction this year. 37 titles out of all the books that I've read this year have been nonfiction, which is about 9%. I'm hoping for that number to go up a little bit in November, as November is nonfiction November, but we shall see. Oh, I always forget to do this. My average rating this month was 3.9, which of course is going to be that's not expected. Usually when I do 30 and 30, I always pick the things that I know I'm going to love. Like that's just the way it goes. So that's it for the statistics. Let's go ahead and jump in. If you're new here and you have no idea what I do for my wrap-ups, I split my wrap-up into 4 different sections. It is the picture books, children's, middle grade, and young. I said 4 sections. It's picture books, children's, middle grade, young adult, and then a comics, graphic novels, and manga section. So it's 5 different sections. I do not review the picture books that I read. I typically just give the title. For picture books, I often give them 3, 4, 5 stars. 3, 4, or 5 stars. Let me clarify that. Except there was one this month that I gave 2 stars because I don't know, y'all. The picture book game is not hitting the same way this month or this year, and I am hoping to get a lot more picture books read through October, November, and December to help prepare me for what will happen with the Youth Media Awards and Caldecott, to give me a better idea of what I think is going to make it as a Caldecott honor or Caldecott winner. We will see, but it just has not been a good picture book reading year at all for me. But the titles that I did end up reading were 100 Goats and Granny, Precious, Annabelle and the Spaghetti Confetti Surprise, My Grandfather's Song, Walking Together, Love in the Library, A Bright Light in Buenos Aires, and A Cafe at the Edge of the Woods, which I've been telling people that if you're an adult that likes cozy fantasy, you will like A Cafe at the Edge of the Woods. It's very, very cute. Unfortunately, so my kid and I read children's books this month. A lot of what I include in the children's book section are books that I read aloud to her at night, and we read aloud almost every night. And yet I have nothing in the children's section for September, which is not true. I just can't for the life of me remember like what we read, because I am not diligent about marking it currently reading in Goodreads because I'm just not processing the information that way. But we read books together in September. I just don't remember what they were. I think one of them was a Nisi and Nene title, but it's fine. For the sake of brevity, I have nothing documented here, so we're just going to move on to the next section. Okay, so the next section that we do have is a middle grade, and I read quite a bit of middle grade, some that worked for me, some that didn't. So the first thing that I ended up reading in the month of September was the Track series by Jason Reynolds. This is not my first time reading some books in this series, but it's my first time reading all four, and I wanted to read all four because the fourth book in the series, Coach, comes out this month, and I wanted to be prepared for it. So I read Ghost, which is book 1, and then we have Patina, which is book 2, Sunny, which is book 3, and Lou, which is book 4. I absolutely love this series, right? This is a 5-star series for me. It's not really shocking because it's Jason Reynolds, and I think that he is an exceptional writer. I think that this is done in a unique way where we are meeting this track team, and in each book we're meeting a different character, and each character has their own ups and downs. Like Ghost is struggling. His father attempted to shoot him and his mother. Patina lives with extended family members because her mother is diabetic and she lost both of her legs, and the state determined that she could not take care of her children. Then we have Sunny, who's kind of like classified as the weird kid, and I love this. This is a book in the series that is drastically different from the rest of the books, and that is super intentional, and I absolutely appreciated that it was drastically different. It's also the shortest in the series, if I'm not mistaken. And then we have Lou, who is albino and has a lot of in terms of like identity, he struggles a lot with that, and so we follow him through that process. But Sunny's book, I think, if I had to pick a favorite, because I feel like I was that weird kid, and I appreciated the way this was written, and I loved kind of looking at the complexity of the relationship that Sunny has with his father. It's very, very fascinating. But 5-star series, really, really great middle grade realistic fiction story that I think that everyone should definitely check out or read at least once. They're very, very quick reads. I would recommend also listening to them on audio, because the audio rendition of all of these is really good as well. But I can't wait to get to Coach, add it to my collection, and be completely done with the series. But I don't know. I hope Jason Reynolds never stops writing. The next book that I read is Free Piano Not Haunted. This was a graphic novel that I just had on my mind to read. I'm not sure why. I read it and unfortunately I didn't like it. That's why I was like, I wonder why I was so interested in this one anyway. Maybe because I thought it was more of a horror story. But it follows a main character who's really into making music. She has a ukulele. She likes playing the ukulele and writing lyrics, and her parents are not together. And her dad is also a musician, but her father is like really, really neglectful, and he's so focused on his own music and getting his social media numbers up that he does not really pay adequate attention to his child, in my personal opinion. And so she just gets really frustrated. She finds this piano on the side of the road and she takes it, and come to find out the piano is haunted by this 80s pop star that you kind of get to know in the beginning of the graphic novel. And so there's a relationship that occurs between the two of them, and there's this bigger plot that's a little bit more horrific, but a lot of it has to do with identity and being I guess, satisfied with who you are as a person and not allowing social media to be this thing that gives you your validation, and that sometimes fame and fortune is not all that it's cut out to be. So while I think that some of those themes are great, I do feel like just overall the writing was really, really clunky. I think that the relationship between her and her father did not give me a satisfying conclusion. As a parent, that is hard to see another parent be so neglectful. And then I know realistically we don't always get that conclusion, or that I should say we don't really get that resolution all the time, but this just did not work for me, and I feel like it had potential, but it just was, the pacing was really, really off. I wasn't a huge fan of the character development and how the course of the story ended up, like, or the direction that the story ended up going in, so it just was not the one for me. So like I said, I ended up giving it 2.5 stars. After that, I ended up reading Hikaru and the Light, which this is interesting because I could technically include this in my really, really rapid fire just talk of all of the manga that I read in September. However, this is a middle grade manga series, which I find fascinating because typically we don't find that many titles that are geared towards specifically a middle grade audience. A lot of them, I think kids can start reading at 11, 12, but in terms of like a series that specifically I'm like, oh yeah, this is definitely set for a middle grade audience, there's not that many. So when this one came about, I was like, oh, this is really, really fascinating. I ended up giving this one 5 stars, and I wanted to talk about it because it's something that Scholastic is doing this a little bit different, where they are acquiring manga that is best suited for a middle grade audience, and I wanted to highlight it just in case I had any teachers, parents, caregivers, other librarians who are looking for manga that is specific for that age group, because in this day and age and in this time, I know how tricky that can be. This is a really good one. It follows a main character, Hikaru, who is really, really good at singing, but she just sings in her grandfather's bathhouse. And he's funny because he's like, I'll set up shows for you and you can just kind of come in here and put on performances. But her close friend that she grew up with is in a idol, or she's an idol. So she's in one of those groups. And then there is this competition that wants to bring back the whole concept and idea of becoming an idol to Japan and having this really in-depth, intense competition. And so she and her friend decide that they're going to enter it, and then they kind of go from there. If you have kids who are really, really interested in like K-pop and idol culture, like this is the story for them. And as someone who's in their 30s that doesn't know much about it, who's not into K-pop, knows about it, has heard it, but it's just not my lane per se, I think that this is a good kind of bridge for that audience, right? This is something that I think a lot of middle grade readers would be really, really interested in. And it's fascinating that Scholastic is taking this opportunity to acquire manga from Japan that would be specifically for this audience, which I think is very smart and is very helpful, like I said, in times like this. So after that, I ended up finishing Tristan Strong Destroys the World. This is the second book in the Tristan Strong series by Kwame Mbalia. 5 stars. This book was so good. Okay, so I must say, when I read Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky, right? I read that one this year. I think I had started it one year, never finished it. I decided this year I was going to pick it up and I was going to finish it. And I was feeling kind of like on the fence about it. I think I gave the first one 4 stars and I was like, it's good, but it took so long for the story to pick up and I wasn't as invested as I wanted to be. This one though, so good. And I can't really tell you much about it because if I tell you anything about it, it essentially spoils what happens in the first book. But I can say it picks up where the first book left off, and it is a beautiful look at mythology representation across the African diaspora. Okay, because when you're first introduced to the series, it's more about Black American legends and myths and some from West Africa. But this folds in a little Caribbean. And it's a lot of interesting things that happen in this book. And I am super excited to start and finish the third book in the series. I'm hoping to get to it this month. That way I can say that I finally finished the series. This is, if you are not into the first book, and the first book was slow moving for you, I promise you the story gets so much better. And that's kind of backwards for me, because usually second book in series, that's where I usually struggle, because it gets that middle book syndrome. But for this series, this is where I feel like the connection between me and Tristan and the rest of the characters and Kwame's writing really truly happened. And this is where I really, really, truly began to appreciate the story. Definitely one of my favorite middle grade fantasies for 2025, even though this book was published in 2021 or 2022. Oh no, was it published? When was this published? 2020. Even though this book was published in 2020. After that, I finished another middle grade graphic novel called Oasis. This is my first time reading from this creator. They have a host of material out, picture books and all. And this graphic novel, I had heard from a coworker, was really good. She really enjoyed it, and I trust her. I trust her judgment on most things, because she put me onto something else, and she's put me onto two things, and I've had like very interesting reactions to them, and they weren't bad, just very interesting reactions. This was really good. The artwork in this is just phenomenal. It's just, it's so amazing. It's a post-apocalyptic dystopian type of setting where we have two children that we're following that live in this kind of desert landscape, where there are storms, and they live on the outskirts of this major city where their mother is working, and is working in a way that it's not directly said, but it shows disparities that the government has created in this post-apocalyptic universe. And so these two kids are very, very isolated, living on their own, taking care of each other. And then there is a robot that comes into the picture and kind of helps them navigate some things. Hope is a very, very big theme in this, and I don't want to say too much, because the beauty of this graphic novel is that it leans heavily into the art. Not that there isn't any text, but the imagery in this is so beautiful and so raw that to give you too much of an explanation would be to spoil everything for you. So I think it's best just to say that is kind of the backdrop that you're working with, and thematically you're working with some really dire situations, but also this whole idea of hope and faith that things can get better when we work together. So that's all I'm going to leave it at. I did enjoy it, and I ended up giving that 4 stars. And then I ended up reading Dear Jackie. This is another middle grade graphic novel that caught me by surprise. Now, I've heard of Jessica Bagley before, because of I can't remember the name of the graphic novel with the fencing kids. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. But this is my first time reading her work. And I was interested in it because I was like, okay, Dear Jackie, where's this gonna go? This was rough. This was a hard one. It follows a main character by the name of Jackie, who is going to middle school, starting middle school, and it does not go well for her. She is struggling because of what society expects of her in terms of gender norms, where she's used to wearing baggy clothes, hoodies, just jeans and sneakers, and there's this expectation that she needs to be more girly, not only from her peers but also from her family, and it causes her to be extremely stressed out. It causes her to be isolated. She has conflict with a close friend, and so she thinks that to help her better fit in, because this is also the time period when everybody starts like, oh, such and such has a crush on this person and that person, and everybody's kind of pairing off, she decides that she's going to write love letters to herself and pretend as if someone else wrote them, and see what that can generate in terms of people who are in the same grade level as her. And you can only imagine how how awful that got. This was difficult to read as a parent, and it was difficult for me as an individual to read it, because I remember going through a phase of being a quote unquote tomboy where I wore like jerseys and jeans and slides, and I was not a big girly girl. I still am not. And girly girl as defined by society, where, you know, I have to wear makeup every day, like I have to dress up like I love being comfortable, and comfortable as a woman is not always what society wants you to be. And society often conditions young women that they must dress up to appeal to the nature of young men. And it's horrible. I think now, because these conversations are becoming more commonplace, that it can be better, and it's gotten a little better. But I know even for me going through middle school and high school, that was not the case. And then people assume things about your sexuality when you dress a certain way. I can't remember how many times like people automatically, oh, you're a lesbian. And I'm like, no. Not quite, but it's hard as a kid to have somebody make assumptions about you, try to push you out of the closet just because of how you appear to them, instead of just saying, if this is how this person feels and they're comfortable in their own skin, then we should allow them just to exist as they are. So I think that was really, really well done. It was just really, really rough in some places, because Jackie goes through so much, and it does have a nice conclusion to it. A little too perfect of a conclusion, if I must say so myself, but it needed that. I think with the stuff that Jackie goes through, it probably just needed a perfect conclusion. Okay, so the first thing we have in this section is Tall Water, which I rated 4 stars. This is by a creator that I've read from before. They're great. This one was this was tough. This was another tough one. I've read a couple of young adult graphic novels now that I'm like, oh my gosh, these are heavy. I read another one just the other day, Fitting Indian, and I cannot wait to talk about that one in my October wrap up, because holy crap, great for a teen audience, but my goodness gracious. So Tall Water is a historical fiction graphic novel where we're following a main character who's living with her father. She is part Sri Lankan. Her father is white. Her mother is Sri Lankan, and she lives in the States. Her mother lives in Sri Lanka, and they don't really communicate. And that's because the infrastructure of Sri Lanka is almost like non-existent, right? So it's hard for them to have any sort of communication, because at the same time we're having the Sri Lankan Civil War happening, and she is a senior in high school. She's thinking about like what she's going to do going forward in terms of like career choices, college. She wants to be a journalist. Her father's a journalist, and so he gets the opportunity to go to Sri Lanka, and she wants to meet her mother because there's this void, which naturally I think would exist, and there's this cultural component of your identity that you know nothing about, right? You have a white father, and it's like, I mean, what can you tell me as a white man about, you know, my Sri Lankan side? So she sneaks and ends up going to Sri Lanka, and her dad's like, you shouldn't do this. And honestly, I mean, completely agree, because it's extremely dangerous, and there are certain things that had to be done in order for them to be able to make it into certain territories. So fortunately, she was able to go. This also coincides with the 2004 tsunami, which I don't know how many people remember the 2004 tsunami. I remember the 2004 tsunami because I had just turned 13 by the time the tsunami happened, and I remember hearing about it on the news. But it is an interesting intersection of the impact of the Civil War at the same time as this tsunami, and how much the war had already devastated people in Sri Lanka, specifically the Tamil people, which is the lens through which the author is writing this from. How much their communities were already impacted, and then you throw a tsunami on top of that, and then you're just dealing with it's just so much. It's a lot. So, but I did enjoy it. I definitely would say like it is heavy. There is death on page. There is, of course, war on page, violence. So if you are sensitive to that, I would keep that in mind before picking it up. But I do think it is a piece of history that we don't teach post-secondary or even in secondary, right? Because I had no idea like how much happened in Sri Lanka. And then I think about how much when, you know, the UK and the US get involved in stuff, things just go horrible. Like every time I read about any type of conflict, I feel like the two are somewhere in the mix. You'd be hard pressed not to find them somewhere in the mix, but I did end up giving that 4 stars. After that, I ended up reading Celestial Banquet. This is a debut, and I was excited for this one, but it didn't quite deliver in the way that I wanted to. It is supposed to be this really interesting teen fantasy book where we're following a main character who is a culinary expert, and in this world you compete in this competition where you are cooking for the gods, and you get a reward at the end for cooking for the gods if you so, you know, if you go through the course of the competition, you compete and you do well. So we're following her through these challenges, which I thought was very interesting in terms of someone who is a foodie. I like learning about different types of food on an international scale. But we had this love triangle situation between our main character and 2 other guys. And this is what I keep saying. I don't know if it's authors. I don't know if it's publishing pushing for it. I don't know what the perception is that every teen book needs to include romance. There's nothing wrong with it, right? I'm not saying that because there are teens who like to read about romance. I think that, you know, at that age, for some teens, it's what they're really, really interested in. When you think about puberty and hormones and just that's just a part of their development. There's nothing to be ashamed of in that. It's not saying that they shouldn't experience those things or they shouldn't see those things on page. However, when writing a book, I think that it needs to happen organically, right? Because as someone who reads a lot of teen fiction, I can tell when a romance happens organically. I can tell when it's true to the character and when it feels like we're adding that element in the space of the novel just to add it because it's something we think teens will appreciate. It's not to say that I didn't like this novel because it's 3 stars. 3 stars is very good. This is very much so a debut, and I am very interested in seeing what the author will do in the future. I think the writing was strong. I think the world building was very interesting. It was a take on a fantasy world that I had not seen before. Adding that culinary element was just very fascinating, and I really appreciated it. However, that love triangle thing, I was like, it took me out of the story because I didn't care. And I'm not saying I didn't care as an adult, because there are some elements in terms of teen romances where I'm like, oh, be still my heart. This is so cute. But I feel like it's written in the course of the novel in a way that makes sense. And in this, I didn't buy it. I wasn't into it as much as I should have been into it. So I ended up giving it 3 stars. Like I said, I definitely still recommend checking it out. I definitely will continue to check out whatever this author puts out. Writing style, very, very good, strong writer, but just that element was just, it did not work for me at all. After that, I ended up reading Pretty Girl County, which, this was a 5-star read for me. If you enjoy Joy Goffney, Elise Bryant, like, this is the book, and I am so glad that I picked it up. It took me a while to get to it, and I had my eyes on it because I thought it was very interesting. I thought the synopsis of it was interesting. I finally got it, came in as a whole. When I tell you, I ate this book up. It follows 2 main characters, is told through their alternating perspectives. used to be really, really close friends. One of the main characters, y'all know I'm horrible about names, so please don't judge me here, okay? All right? I read a lot, and names are not things that I retain very easily. But one of the main characters ends up moving out of their lower income community because her mom is able to make a little bit more income. Basically starring on what is a version of the Real Housewives of Potomac. And probably part of me is why I found this so interesting, because I love the Real Housewives of Potomac. And it was very interesting seeing that element kind of woven into the framework of the story. But what it really does well, and what I really, really appreciated is this social commentary about wealth disparity and what happens to relationships when one is able to move forward or move out of a more impoverished situation into wealth, and how that changes them as a person. Because our two main characters, like I said, they were tight. And then when money came into the picture, they were not. They didn't have that relationship anymore. And in fact, they kind of run in two different circles at this point. And even though they go to the same school, it's just one of those situations where how they view the world is going to be completely different. And so our main character, who's stepped into wealth, she wanted to get into FIT, but she was waitlisted, I believe, and so she decides that she's going to put on this fashion show during the summer in order to kind of prove that she is one that is able to get into FIT. And then we have our other main character, who is really good at like digital designing and does these interesting like packages for Sims, which took me all the way back. I was like, oh gosh, I miss playing The Sims, but I would completely like crash my computer if I tried playing The Sims right now. And they end up having to work together on a couple of things, because she needs money in order to get into her school. She wants to go to Spelman, and she just doesn't have the funds. Her family doesn't have the funds for her to go to Spelman. And of course, our other main character, she has the money, but she needs help with her designs. And so previous friends coming back together in order to kind of work through their relationship, which I found to be like really, really interesting and different. And there are some romances that exist. And I think this is the case where the romances work really well. They weren't center stage. They didn't take away from the story, and they felt like they occurred naturally. It was very, very organic relationships. And I thought just added to the discussion about Black people not being a monolith, right? I think when people look at any specific community, they often look at those people existing in a tunnel. Like, we all have the same experiences, and that's not true, because you have a full cast of Black people in this book, and how they perceive the world and each other is very different based off of their experience, and a lot of the key factor in how they have their experiences as well. So I also liked that we have a Black-owned bookstore mentioned in this, and we get these wonderful name droppings of Black authors. It was just so good. Like, this is a book that I actually need to order because it is one that I want to have in my collection, because it was just so well done, and definitely one of my favorite young adult contemporary books of the year. Okay, moving on. Let's see here. Okay, so the next thing I have is another young adult graphic novel, I Shall Never Fall in Love. This was a recommendation to me from Jess, and I ended up really enjoying it. I gave it 4 stars. It is told in the same hurry up and pass by, please. I hope everyone is okay. Okay, it's told kind of in the same vein as you would expect a Jane Austen book to kind of flow. It feels like it's loosely based off of some elements from Pride and Prejudice, but it's not a complete retelling, but definitely you can see the inspiration there. I'm so sorry about the sirens. Like, it might be another, it sounds like fire truck, goodness gracious. But it's not exactly a direct retelling, and it does focus on 2 main characters. One who clearly is trying to better understand like their attraction to women. The idea of them having to marry is not appealing, and yet these close relationships that they have with other women, there's more explorations into what those feelings really are. Then we have another main character who is trans, and I think that this graphic novel is not only just cute and charming because we see this romance bud between these two characters who have been friends for an extremely long time, but also we get to see this exploration of trans history and the fact that trans people have always existed. And in this day and time, and I keep saying this because I know I brought this up earlier, but it is truly important in this day and time to have that representation, to let people know that this is not something that's new, because let anybody else tell you trans people just started existing within the past 5 years. Like, they've never existed before then. And as you can see within the framework of the story and the author's note in the back, there is a long history of trans people that we have knowledge of. And so I think that this does a really good job capturing that, but also giving us that like romance, a simplistic romance and yearning that we often see whenever we read Jane Austen. So I really like this one, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. I then went and picked up my only nonfiction for the month, which is Putin versus Zelensky, the Russo-Ukrainian War, Why It's Happening, and How It All Got Started. I ended up giving this one 4 stars, but I do want to preface it with like my own, I guess, somewhat bias. I did major in history, and so I'm 9 times out of 10, I'm always intrigued by nonfiction books that fall under the category of history or current events, and this kind of plays with both. I know that this is for a teen audience. However, I do think that this is going to be for a very specific teen audience. You have to have a teen reader who is very, very interested in history, because this gets down into some of the nitty-gritty aspects of Russian history, Ukrainian history, the interconnectedness of the two countries. We're talking about the history of rulers, and it's not a long book, but it goes deep enough to a point where I'm like, I'm not going to give this to someone who's just casually interested in what's going on. But it did perk my own interest up in Russian history, because it is trauma filled, it is deep, it is dark, and I literally just, even reading this one, I was like, was there ever like a moment where maybe things were not this dark and gruesome? And unfortunately it doesn't really feel that way. And then learning about the relationship between the Ukraine and Russia and how we got from point A to point B was done very, very well by the author. And I think the author presented all of the information in a very objective way, right? There were even points where he said, you just have to be able to form your own opinion about this. Like, I'm not going to tell you what to think, which is key right now when we're in an era where people lack critical thinking skills and they're unable to think for themselves. And so in formatting the book to be given to readers in a way where it's like, here, I'm presenting the facts to you, and what you make of this information is solely up to you. As someone who used to do DBQs, I promise you, I very much appreciated that. And if you know what a DBQ is. Let me tell you, if you know. So I really appreciated that element, and I thought it was just a very fascinating book, woven with a lot of interesting elements that made me want to learn more specifically about that region of the world. I think a lot of the books too that I read this month, I'm just thinking about the fact that I read like Tall Water, reading Putin versus Zelensky. There were 2 other graphic novels that I've recently read in the past 2 weeks that really open your eyes up to specific things that happen around the globe that you're not often aware of, because you're not told, it's not reported by Western media, or it's just kind of glazed over it. Or 9 times out of 10 too, the US has their hands in stuff that they do not want their citizens to know that they've had their hands in. So I did enjoy that one, and like I said, I gave it 4 stars. After reading that, I read A Bird in the Air Means We Can Still Breathe. Mahogany L. Browne, this is my 3rd book that I've read by Mahogany. I've also read Mahogany's picture book, Woke. I'm always fascinated by just the ability to write to a authentic teen experience. There are people who write teen books where it's not authentic to the teen experience. It's authentic to the adults who grew up reading teen books and were wanting to keep them within this specific age category because they have purchasing power. And I just realized now y'all have a clean view of all the books in my box of tissues on my bed. Girl, I don't even care at this point. It's whatever is whatever. So I was just really fascinated. I am really fascinated by mahogany just as a writer. This one specifically is written as an ode to the teens who experienced lockdown and the pandemic, and how it forever changed them as humans. It changed the way they interact with each other. It changes the way they interact with their community, how they view themselves, job opportunities, just learn, like their ability to learn. All of that was changed by the pandemic. And a lot of times when we talk about the pandemic, we talk about its impact on adults. When we think about things like long COVID and job security and prices of goods and services now and inflation, like all of that stuff is very adult. And I feel like the conversations never veer off into the, what about the youth? And not just the youth in terms of their test scores, because we know clearly that the pandemic altered the way in which these kids are able to learn. We know that. Test scores show that. Studies about the ability to focus. All of that we know that. But what about the mental, emotional, and physical impact? Right? How do they navigate existing in a world in which they were so used to not being in the presence of other humans outside of their families? And depending upon the makeup of their family, that also could have looked very differently. How do we look at a teenager who was living life one day and then the next day their entire family's been wiped out? What about the long-term effects of that? Like that's trauma enough for anybody, but I always think about like how that amount of trauma impacts kids and how they have to navigate life after experiencing something like that. I know that the pandemic was hard on me mentally because I don't like being enclosed like that. That was very hard for me for a very long time. I struggle with that, and part of my coping mechanisms for my mental health was to escape four walls. This was prior to the pandemic. Like going through therapy, like I had to learn that my coping mechanism was to get outside of the house, and so to know that getting outside the house is a coping mechanism, only for the pandemic to change that was rough. And I was grown at that time. And so reading this book made me even think about like, dang, I'm an adult that's lived a certain amount of my life, right? I've experienced things. I've lived through those years without that trauma. I can't imagine what it would have been like to be a kid during that time, and how these kids are not functioning at this point. And I think Mahogany did a very good job of giving us different experiences and interconnecting them in a way that creates this bigger picture of, don't forget that these kids have a voice, and we should be asking them, like, how are you doing? How is life for you right now? How has life changed? How do you feel? Like that, those are important questions. But I really like this one, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. All right, y'all, let's talk a little bit now about the graphic novels, manga, and comics. I am literally only going to talk about one, and that's Poison Ivy Volume 1. This is one that we read for our Realm of Comics book club, and I gave it 4 stars. I really liked it. It's G. Willow Wilson, who I really enjoyed G. Willow Wilson's writing just from the time that I really was introduced to her when she was writing Miss Marvel, and reading all 10 volumes of that run and really enjoying it, and now getting this experience of G. Willow Wilson moving to DC and doing one of the most iconic characters, I personally think, in DC, Poison Ivy, post Joker War. All this stuff happening while we have Infinite Frontier happening in tandem. So it was just unique. I think that the issue with this series, I gave it 4 stars. I enjoyed it. The issue with this series that I think a lot of people are going to have, and I told the crew that usually comes to our comic book club meetings that I did not realize because this was my pick for the book club, I did not realize that you had to have so much background knowledge of Poison Ivy, her relationship to Harley, even her relationship to like the Swamp Thing. Like, there's some interconnectedness that you had to be aware of, because pieces and parts of it would not make sense. It's not a love story per se. It is, but I think you're not going to get that feel in this first volume, because we're following Poison Ivy after specific events, and she is angry. And so in coping with this anger, she decides that she's going to infect the world with these spores, in which it kills people, but the way that it kills people is very euphoric. That's the best way I know how to come up with. Like, it is like they die experiencing euphoria, and so it's a very kind killing, but there is a environmentalist angle to it in how much humans are making the earth deteriorate, right? This is the only planet that we have, and so we must respect her. We must appreciate her, and at this point she's like, you don't you don't respect it, you don't appreciate it, you don't have reverence for the power that is Earth, and so y'all got to go. And so it's very complicated in terms of her projecting of her pain, and her wanting to do this as a means of coping, and kind of having to realize that she has some trauma that she hasn't necessarily dealt with. And at the same time, there's this communication with Harley Quinn about the state of their relationship, and how they will or will not work through all of their own personal issues. So there's that. I gave it 4 stars. I almost don't want to recommend going into that one too lightly, just because of it's hard. Like, that's just one of those things where it's like, it's good, but not having that context makes it just a tad bit more confusing. I read a lot of manga for 30 and 30. I think I read 27 volumes or something like that, something along those lines. So I'm just going to go through those volumes really quick, because I did talk about every single one of these volumes in my 30 for 30 part 1 vlog, which there never was any other part, so part 1 is kind of crazy for me to label it part 1. But I did a 30 and 30 part 1 vlog, and then I did a read it or haul it that was focused on my manga collection. And so I literally have already talked about all of these. I'll make sure the links to both of those videos are down in the description box below, just in case you do want to check them out. But I will just go through the titles very quickly. End up reading Insomniacs After School Volume 10. I read The Apothecary Diaries Volume 5, Volume 6, and Volume 7, which I own. And then I read The Summer Hikaru Died Volume 1 through 4, which was, let me tell you, that was a journey. That was a journey, and nobody can tell me that was not a journey. I also read somebody already told me how to pronounce this. Haru Ride. Someone already told me how to pronounce this, and I still can't get it right. But I read Volume 1. And then I read Somali and the Guardian of the Forest, Volumes 1 through 2. I read Firefly Wedding Volume 3, then Water Dragon's Bride Volume 5, Yokohama Kadashi Kiku Deluxe Edition Volume 1, which was so good. Currently waiting on Volume 2 from the library. See if it ever comes in. Then I ended up reading My Dress Up Darling Volume 1, which I am unhauling, sad to say. I also read Let's Eat Together Volume 1, which I'm also unhauling. I then read Hyperventilation Volume 1. I read Eat, which I'm also unhauling. It's a lot of unholding that happened. And then I read the manhwa Punch Drunk Love Volume 1, which I am keeping. And then 2 volumes that I have downstairs, but I'm not going downstairs yet at all, which is wild. But I read D-Fight Island Volumes 1 and 2. You can see on the screen why I'm not saying the full name, because I'm not trying to get flagged. But I did read both volumes and finish out the series, which was good for me. And then I also read Delicious in Dungeon Volume 3. And then I thought I had the other volume up here, but maybe I didn't bring it up here. Maybe I didn't. I could have left it downstairs. But I did read Last Quarter Volume 1. Who knows where that is? That is it, y'all. That's everything that I read. If you're interested, I read one adult title this month. Well, I read one adult prose title this month, and that was Phantasma, but I usually talk about that stuff, wrap that stuff up for patrons, so just in case you're interested, that was the title that I read. But anyway, let me know in the comments down below what you ended up reading this month. What were your favorites? What were your disappointments? As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications. If you're looking for ways to support the channel, all those links will be down in the description box below. And I will be back with another video soon. Bye!